Welcome to our group podcast. My name is David. We have 4 people around the table for today's group dialogue. Our basic format, each person brings along a question for the group to explore. Our first question for today comes from Bernard.
Yes, I've got a question. It's not so much a question as probably a question about having an exploration. It's not meant to be subversive, but you may think it is, but it isn't. Given that what we're seeking to connect with is beyond words, and we can't get there really by thinking about it, whatever we're trying to uncover, I wonder what the value of actually having questions really is, and how do we see that having questions help us get to this place?
Well, I think questions are really important. I think being curious is really important. So therefore, I think initially on this journey, your curiosity leads to questions. And I also think the question dies when it's known directly, when the answer that you're seeking becomes unimportant, when it's felt as a direct experience. But I think questions are seeking, and it has a place. But they will die when one becomes kind of known to the answer in a way that's a feeling and not a thinking. And so it is a process of understanding what you're not. And the questions lead you into understanding in that stillness what you're not. I think being curious is very important. It kind of distills as you move into this state of awareness.
Right. Well, I think if you look at the history of spirituality, the question, who am I, goes through the centuries, And normally when we're asking questions, because of our education, we go to the mind for answers, but you can ask a question which goes to awareness. And that will reveal something new. You will get a discovery rather than a repetition of thought. So, most teachings, spiritual teachings, indicate that there is a false sense of self and a true sense of self. And so the question can be, what sense of self is listening to these words? And how do we know this is an authentic sense of self? So yet the question can help to open up a discovery. I mean, in my kitchen at the moment, I've got a picture by an artist called Larry. There's more than 100 people in that picture. And anyone who's had a picture on the wall for many years, we're not looking anymore, we're not learning anything new. But if you ask the question, what is it in this picture that I've never seen before? Then obviously you can't go to memory for the answer. And that opens up. The awareness comes in to see something new that has never been seen before. To see the false sense of self as a direct perception rather than as an idea. And that brings about a shift so you can find yourself operating in a different way. There's a deeper inner peace, and that this discovery comes as a shock, because most of our life we're living in a sort of semi-dream state. You can sense there's more compassion. You can sense this underlying peace is not correcting other people. So you're operating from a different state, a different dimension. And you don't know what that word dimension is until you've experienced it. It's just like a science fiction term. Or you don't know what awakening is until you've had an experience of it. So the question, and then you stop don't go to the mind beyond the question. And that question can guide you into awareness, And in the awareness you'll discover something you haven't known before. And that helps to reveal a new state of living from a different sense of I, I hope that's of help.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I agree with all that you say very much. And I think also, particularly in gatherings, there's something about the energetic exchange between the questioner and the answerer and the listener when everybody is in or going towards that state. There's something that really amplifies it and starts to bring the answer from that place, really. I always remember when I used to meditate with a lot of people in India, and even thousands, and the Guru would say, "Are there questions?" "Oh, yes. Shall we meditate first or shall we have the questions?" "Oh, we'll meditate first." And after the meditation, most of the questions had gone. So it was in the actual experience. And I've been watching, I did a little online retreat with Eckhart, not just a couple of months ago. And it was interesting to watch the questions and the answers and what actually happened energetically in the questions. There was some sort of transmission in a way. And whether the person felt their question had been answered on the cerebral level or not, they looked radiant after they had had the actual interaction at that level with Eckhart. And of course, he always says about the Ramana Maharshi question, "Who am I?" that the answer is in the silence following the question.
Mm-hmm. I remember many years ago attending talks, Krishnamurti's talks and other talks, and people would ask questions and they would hand questions in. And I was very interested in listening to the questions and the answers and pondering them myself. I think latterly that I felt that process is kind of hollow for me. And I'm kind of feeling my way into it. I don't really know what that's about. I think for me, I'm just struck by how the chaos in the world just now and the sadness and the division, and that's not the whole of reality, obviously. There's a whole universe of beauty. But I think if you to ask someone in the general public just now, to ask a question, it would be, why are we living like this? Why are women and children and men who aren't involved in a war, who haven't taken up arms, why are they being killed by people, showing no aggression to other people? Why are politicians indifferent? Why are countries indifferent? Why are people lost in their own lives and their own day-to-day worries and concerns? We're all so connected via the internet that we're aware that there's instant communication. We're all aware of what's going on in the world. And I think there's a feeling of helplessness, and that people are asking questions of themselves. What can I do to help? What can I do to stop this? And I think there's a kind of panicked feeling generally. You can sense it when people are talking about what's going on. And a feeling that they're asking questions and they're seeking answers and nothing is changing. And that's where I feel we are just now. Certainly for me, that's what I'm very conscious of, the frustration that people feel. People will go out in the streets, make their banners, whatever, but nothing really changes. So that's just my observation just now.
I think it's going back to what you said, bringing Krishnamurti into the discussion from there and his teachings. And I know that you, as I am, and I don't know who else around the table, David, is very aware of his teachings. And he speaks basically of conflict. And he's been speaking of conflict for a long, long time in the world. And so this that we find ourselves in now is absolutely horrendous conflict. And it's causing us people to be very panicked and fearful, as you say, and I agree with that. But I also think that there is something that we can do. And yes, we can go out and have peaceful demonstrations and speak our truth, and that's all very helpful, of course it is. But in an individual sense, if we understand Krishnamurti's teaching of this, we are the world and the world is me, and as you say, we're all connected, then we really have to find a change within ourselves. And if we look outside for the change that people are waiting for, because as you've said, everyone's waiting for it to change, but it remains the same. We have to, if we're connected, the change has to be from here in our hearts and from our internal place that Krishnamurti talks about, that we all understand. It has to take place there so that there is change. And so if there's a change and an understanding within ourselves of all that's going on, be it through Krishnamurti's teachings or not, or just through our own awareness, our own curiosity, our own questions, going back to the first dialogue, then we have to go there to understand that we can create the change that can be projected into the world. Because there is nothing that one individual can do. It seems to, as you're saying, it's gaining pace. It seems to be getting worse, in inverted commas. And so I think the answer most definitely has to be, how can I change? Why do I perceive the world as this? Why is it so overwhelming for me? How can I understand it that my perception of what's happening, given the teachings that you know or not, or your own journey, how can I make a change? And for that to emanate into the world. I think that's a way forward.
Yeah, I tend to resonate with most of what Marie said. The shift has to come within the person. And also part of that is recognizing that the shift is not coming from most of us. And if you look at this, the topic is questions. Most of the time, the questions are, if you're in the Middle East and you're having a dialogue and you're asking questions, if you're in Palestine or Israel, it's very common for people, they don't allow one another to finish a sentence because the questions are colored by the past. They're not getting a direct perception of what the question is pointing to something. And as soon as they point to something, the past comes in and says, oh, but it's the Palestinians to blame, it's the Jews to blame. And once Ukraine is under the authority of Russia, all will be well, etc. Once we capture Greenland, everything will be rosy. So we're repeating the same mistakes. And part of that is we're satisfied with other people's descriptions. We're not asking the question, how do I know this is true? If most of the people in Russia asked that question, there'd probably be a different government. So the key thing is to see when we're not changing and to shift I had two people in my front room, and both of them had been 30 years of listening to Krishnamurti. But they're listening to descriptions, and they're repeating the same thing over and over again. One of them came to the conclusion that Krishnamurti still has ego. The other one is highly praised, but it's praising another entity. It's not discovering. The discovery has to come from going to awareness rather than going to the mind, the human mind that repeats. So the question is used to point towards the awareness. How do I know this is, I'm operating from an authentic sense of self? And not, the question stops there, the mind stops there at that point. What can I see in this picture that I've never seen before? So that opens a space for discovery. I was in a shop a few days ago, and there's a woman talking to the young woman servant, and I suddenly had a feeling of her energy, the woman I've never met before. And I thought, I could sense her energy field. And she suddenly stopped talking and turned around and spoke to me. She says, "What do you think?" And when she left the shop, she was staring at me because she could sense something as well. And that's something new that hasn't happened before. So to come up on the new, we have to stop repeating the old. That's the key point. And not just be satisfied with a book full of descriptions, even if the descriptions are beautiful. We don't end up with the menu. So it's talking about what works for us and what's not working for us, you know. And certainly it has to do with discovering a change within us, ourselves, as Marie pointed out, rather than waiting for the politicians to shift. I think we've got a couple of questions coming up, and I think some more light will be thrown on this from these questions.
May I just say one more thing? But otherwise I shall probably forget it. I'd just like to share something else that Eckhart said on this retreat that I had a couple of months ago, because there were lots of questions and lots of things about what we've been talking about the difficulty of these times. And he said we mustn't forget that which encourages growth and awareness is the very thing that opposes it. And he gave this wonderful image of a small seed. If you plant a small seed, you put earth on the top of it. If that seed comes up too quickly and is too spindly, the gardener will then put more earth on it to make it work even harder to come through. And maybe that's what's going on at the moment. I thought it was a lovely image, though.
Yeah, as a teenager, I had an allotment, my cousin and I, and the guy next to us had the allotment, and his lettuces were twice as big as ours. So we wanted to find out where he bought his seeds, and he bought them from the same shop as we bought them. But when he watered the lettuce, he watered the lettuce in a circle, maybe 18 inches away from the plant, so that the roots would grow strong. So that's in me a story.
Yes, that's lovely.
I have come across this, and it has been my mantra, one of them. And it's a very ancient guru sage, very humble man called Tilopa. Let be the past. Let be the future. Let be what is happening. Do not take action. No need to figure things out. Relax. Just be still.
Thank you, and I think we'll move on to our next exploration. It's more of an exploration than a question. I'm bringing in two questions around the one topic. It's how does the psychic experience relate to, let's call it the awareness experience at the moment? These words are not quite accurate, but it's more like the awareness experience is more to do with that which underlies all experience. But for the moment, how does the psychic experience relate to the awareness experience? And I'll take two different aspects. The first one, synchronicity. I'll try and get this story as short as I can manage. Recently I went down to London to see my daughter. Part of the plan was in the evening we would go to the Albert Hall, and there was a large philharmonic orchestra playing spooky music from films, and in between there would be some ghost stories. And one of the stories, we were informed beforehand, was to do with the author Arthur Conan Doyle. How 2 weeks after he died, the largest séance in the world was held in the Royal Albert Hall, 6,000 people. So I travelled down to London in the train, and I found the train journey, which is about 5 hours, a bit tedious. So I took a book with me, and the book was Arthur and Me. It's a story of how the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre came to be in Edinburgh. A group of mediums made contact with someone called Arthur. And out of this, the book I'm reading comes out of these seances and how this centre in Edinburgh was established. So I had 3.5 hours of reading about Arthur Conan Doyle. I met my daughter in London. We went to some bookshops. We went to the National Gallery. We were a little bit too early to go to the Albert Hall. We changed our plan. Instead of going for a meal in Trafalgar Square, she says, look, I've looked up the Google map. There's a place in South Kensington, 20 shops in a square, and there's a straight road to the Albert Hall, 20-minute walk, and we can get there, and just about the time that we should be there. So we went to this location. We got a taxi. We'd never been in this place before. We got a bag of chips and some lemonade. And my daughter Sarah says, before we go on this 20-minute walk, I'd like a glass of wine. So I pointed to the public bar, which was directly opposite. We went inside. There was one seat at the back. She said, do you want a drink or something to eat? No. Then I started looking at the menu. Menu was supported by a salt and pepper pot either side. And as I'm staring, the mind went silent. And 5 words appeared. Look at the back page. Not 6 words or 10 words. Look at the back page. So I opened it up, and my right hand thumb is on the leather, black leather, and my left hand thumb is on the writing, and just above the thumb it says Arthur Conan Doyle. This was a history of the public bar we were seated in. Conan Doyle, it seems, lived in London for 2 years. He lived in South Kensington, and this was his favourite public bar. So when my daughter sat down with the wine, I showed her. She says, does this mean that we're meant to be here? I says, it looks like it. She says, spooky dad. I read the whole thing, and down the bottom there was a group of houses nearby called the Holmes. And it seems a year and a half after he left South Kensington, he wrote his first Sherlock Holmes book. But the key part about the story is not what's happening on the surface. The key part is what's happening underneath. Because when I'm looking at that menu, there's no thought activity. There's a deep curiosity. There's something about this menu that I don't know. The conditioned mind doesn't know what's on the back page. David does not know what's on the back page. And when these words come in, it's not 20 words or 50. The ego tends to be long-winded. It's just 5 words. Look at the back page. And that is a basic psychic event. Carl Jung called synchronicity a psychic event. So it's coming, the psychic, these words are coming out of the silence of the mind. They're not coming from memory. So I'm trying to think of a quotation, and this scientist, and the quotation is that synchronicity is God's way of acting in the world while remaining anonymous. So I'll just throw that out as a starter, but it points to there's something else going on. The conscious conditioned mind is not, and that it doesn't have the capacity to stop the war on the surface. The capacity comes from that awareness which is behind thought coming to the foreground. And it has greater capacity to bring about peace and change in this planet rather than us going, we're consistently going to the memory to solve our difficulties, rather than going to the discovery of something new, which comes from the awareness prior to thought. So I'd just like to see what people feel about that little story first. The scientist is Albert Einstein. Synchronicity is God's way of operating in the world while remaining anonymous.
Yes, I mean, it would be wonderful if there could be a really creative solution to the world's problems rather than an intellectual one. And all great discoveries come from that place that David's talked about, that place of creation. The theory of relativity didn't come by any stretch of the working of the conscious mind, Mozart said, I don't know where my inspiration comes from. It comes when I'm walking alone in the country at night. It just comes. So it's very much about getting out of the way. And I had a teacher once who also said that when the universe wishes to give an answer, it generates the question.
The definition of synchronicity that I remember is meaningful coincidence. It's obviously more than coincidence, but I think in relation to what we're talking about on a world scale, there is a synchronicity that people are aware of a crisis in culture and society and human relations. And I kind of, talking about that here, I kind of see that as a kind of synchronicity, that people do feel powerless and they feel they've done everything. They feel everything's been tried, and there's a stuckness. But the fact that is occurring, it's a fact. I've felt it we've all felt it the past few years. And an immense sadness about it today, I particularly felt. And but that there's a synchronicity about that sadness. It pervades the world. And thinking about what others are saying here, then that must have its own action. It will have its own action. We just don't know what it will be. But the fact of doing these podcasts that David has set up, it is a way of connecting in whatever way we can across the world. And I see that as that synchronicity, that synchronous act as being at least some way of opening things up. You just don't know where that's going to go. But we kind of know where things are going to go if there isn't an openness to creativity, something new.
I think that Gandhi's saying, be the change you want in the world. And the other one I'm thinking of is meditation, it is not. What is it? And that links almost to what you're saying, what you always say, Gavin. Rest in the mystery. And amid the chaos, and like yourself, Gavin, I will part of me knows, as you said, Marie, the answer is be the change you want in the world. Be as calm amid the chaos as you can be, because, as Bernard says, real creativity is making links where they were never made before.
I'm going to move on to the next aspect of the relationship between the psychic and the awareness teachings. I've got a few quotes here from Eckhart Tolle about the topic of the psychic. And this first quote is, "Spirit communication from those who have passed doesn't guarantee a communion of wisdom. Those with psychic abilities and some spiritual entities may still be ego posturing. A good question to ask is, does this contribute to inner freedom, a spiritual awakening?" A little add-on line. It may help to remember, just because you're dead doesn't mean you're smart. I've had a long experience with a relation to this word psychic. My mother was a spiritualist medium. So my first 17 years of my life, I was a background child or teenager to see lots of seances. My mother was a normal housewife during the day, but in the evening, she spoke at twice the speed. She was doing trance mediumship and she had a Chinese accent. So that's probably what helped to develop the question, what on earth is going on here? So my experience is you will find people who are egocentric in the world of spiritualism, and you will find people who are authentic, and that goes across the board. You may be talented as a psychic, you may be talented as a musician or an artist. I like there's a spiritual teacher called Jean Klein. He describes the ego as the ballerina does a beautiful dance and she steps forward at the end of the dance to take the applause. And the clown runs out from the wings and stands in front of the ballerina and bows, takes the bow. This is the ego claiming to be responsible for the great dance, the great artwork. Michelangelo spent a great deal of his life claiming he was the creative one. It's only when he became nearer to his death, he admitted he had been a fraud. There was only one creativity, and it was certainly not Michelangelo. So I'll give you the story of the psychic. When I was 20 years of age, in case there's someone out here, this may be of value. I went to see my mother. I took 3 books wrapped in thick brown paper, and she didn't know what these books were. I was a musician playing in bands, and if she was guessing, it would be a music book, but it wasn't. The first book was called Memories, Dreams, Reflections by Carl Jung. Meetings with Remarkable Men by Gurdjieff was the second book, and the Krishnamurti Reader was the third book. Now, this is when I'm 28 years of age. We're talking more than 50 years ago, and I've had thousands of conversations, but this one I have not forgotten in detail. So the conversations can have impact. My mother tended to have 1 or 2 spiritual guides, but on this occasion there was 8 guides. She said to me this was different. So she picked up the first book, and she wouldn't know anything about any of these 3 people, even if the books were not covered. And she picked it up and she said, "I see someone in a white coat, some kind of a doctor." Although he would not see himself as a spiritualist, he was probably the most psychic human being who has ever lived. And anybody wants to explore that, I would suggest reading the book called Catafalque by Peter Kingsley, which backs up that claim. Most of the world's seen Jung as a psychiatrist, but it was like the iceberg. You're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Most of what Jung was about, he was mysticism. He was a mystic. I mean, you look at his life story, the synchronicities, which is the word he brought into psychology, and the psychic events. You can see that this For a woman looking at a piece of brown paper, how could she possibly know that? You know. The next book she picks up, she drops the book. She says, this book is red hot with energy. The person who wrote this book had immense energy, but it's difficult to tell if he's good or bad. Now, if you know anything about Gurdjieff, you won't get a more accurate description. One of the books about Gurdjieff is The Unknowable Mr. Gurdjieff. You know. The third book she picked up, very short statements, but very precise, very much in tune with what these books are about, without any doubt. She picks up the Krishnamurti book, and possibly 2 minutes went by and she didn't see anything. And I says, do you not get anything? She says, no, the guys are telling me to tell you doesn't make any sense. It didn't fit in with her philosophy of life. And her philosophy, whether you were an embodied human being or you were a spirit, you were spirit whether you were in human form or beyond human form. Every entity was a spirit, every animal had a spirit. But the message was, this person is not to be found in the world of spirit. Strange statement. And then she said to me, does that make any sense to you? I said, yes, because in one of it, I'd heard more than 20 live talks by Krishnamurti. But in one talk, it was a summer's day, and he stopped speaking for about a minute in the middle of a talk. And then he said, the speaker is not here. It's the only time I heard him say that. He also, when he wrote the book called The Notebook, it's the only book I know where the word I is not mentioned throughout the whole book. So in some sense, if you want to know the inner world, Krishnamurti, that's the book to look at. And in another sense, Krishnamurti is not to be found in that book. It's difficult when we get to the position of there's people in this world who have psychic abilities and the vast majority don't. And in music, maybe there's 1 in 20 people play a musical instrument. But it's probably more like 1 in 1,000, I would guess, who have some ability to do mediumship to some degree. Very, very few. And for the rest of us, it can be quite a bewildering topic. But it's connected to the awareness. I sometimes describe it, you're writing in black ink. Black ink is everybody can see the black ink, but above the black ink there's a faint yellow ink. And I was in the Conan Doyle Centre with 32 people. 5 of us could see an aura around a human being, and the 27 others could see nothing. And that's very difficult for people working in psychology. We both, Gavin and I, have been with Steve Taylor, psychologist, professor of psychology. How does he deal with that? He hasn't had that deep channel and his experience. How do you bring that into play, into psychology? That's very, very difficult, you know. But it's part of life. And once you've seen or witnessed something like that, you can't deny it because it doesn't fit a scientific theory or a background. So I'm being long-winded with this, but does anybody have any comments to make on what I've said so far about that?
I'd just like to share, it reminded me that in the 60s and 70s, there was a woman called Rosemary Brown, who was a very ordinary London lady. She worked as a dinner lady in the school where her children went, and she'd had 6 months or a year of piano lessons. And she had psychic abilities, and she began to channel music. Her own musical education was very, very limited, and yet she channeled music that she said had come from the great composers. And the great composers didn't only channel music, they also accompanied her on shopping trips, and Liszt inquired about the price of bananas, and Chopin stopped the bathwater from overflowing. So she had a very strong connection with these things. And the music she produced, well, it was never explained. She was examined in all sorts of ways. She was scientifically examined. She was asked to produce it under pressure and recordings with everything. And she had a peculiar way of writing it, which was very odd, but it was in line with her musical ability. And some of the pieces were wonderful. They were really very much in the style of the composer, and others seemed more derivative, really. And there were a lot of concert pianists championed the music and played it a lot, and there were a lot of discussions about it. And then she began to do paintings as well, and paintings never sort of really became as well known as the compositions, but it was never ever explained. It was what she was producing was far above her musical education and her general education. Never explained.
Yeah, I could just add a little bit to that. There is, on YouTube, you'll find a man called Rick Archer who's done 700 interviews for 1 month. You go back 1 month, you'll get... This is a man who was his coat caught in the doors of the train as the train was leaving the station. And he almost died, but he had the out-of-body experience. He was dyslexic, had no O-levels. He's now writing symphonies, and he's an artist. These abilities have only came about after this accident. You can check out, I can't remember the name at the moment, but and also Leonard Bernstein that went to a psychic in New York who, again, supposedly could play different styles, and he confirmed that this was authentic. You know? And you've had a medium playing like a chess champion, although they had no ability to play chess. Yeah.
I'm interested in the kind of word psychic as a label, you know, as someone who is described as being psychic. And although there are people who are able to communicate, to, channel. And I think that there's a possibility that people get hooked into the word being a psychic. And it's almost an ego sensation attached to it. I think this ability to sense beyond, for me, is better described as intuition. Because I feel that even beyond the word intuition, this trajectory towards the ability to have this other sense beyond our senses is and can be the opening to our own awareness of who we are beyond this physical, our senses in this world, our body, our place as a human being. So this other sense, this intuition, I feel is almost a progression that is awareness. And when we come out of our head and really fall into this space of awareness self, if you like, then this other sense kind of separates us from the human with the heaviness of this frequency to a higher frequency, energetic dimension, energetic resonance, which is intuition, which is a state of awareness, which is the creativity that allows for us to perhaps be able to play, produce art, because we're not getting in the way, this personhood. And we are then aligned by this word intuition, if you want to use the word, or whatever word you use. It's an energetic resonance, it's frequency that we feel that is beyond the person, that is the creation is it manifests itself. And I think that, because I think when you say like psychic, there are people that get hooked onto that and it becomes, I'm a psychic. I'm a butcher, so there's a very, it's like, well, what is that? It's the question is, what is that? How does that feel? What is, where is that in you? Where are you in that? Because it is an energetic movement, an awareness, an alignment, a frequency that feels entirely different from the personhood.
I'm just going to add just one thing. My feeling about this issue is that there's a difference between knowing and being aware of thoughts running through your mind when so-called psychic events seem to happen. I remember getting in a car with my partner and we could go anywhere, but I really thought I wanted to go to a particular place that she had been, which I hadn't been, which was a pond tucked away somewhere in Glasgow. And I had a strong feeling when I said to go there that I would meet someone that I used to work with who'd been injured at work, and she'd been my supervisor. And so there was a close bond between us. On a consciousness level, we just seemed to, be in the same sort of wavelength. And sure enough, when we got there walking around this pond, it's in nature, although there's the built-up area quite close by. It was a canal bank and canal path, and this woman came along on a bike. Now, this woman who was injured hadn't been near a bike in years. And it was the lady I thought about. And she went past, she couldn't believe she saw me, and she contacted me on my phone, and we met up later on. But that was a kind of instance of, I just had this knowing that I was going to see her, and there was no reason to think that.
Can I just add, going back to the synchronicity, I wasn't part of that discussion, but I think then you're describing that as a kind of synchronicity. And I feel like, listen to your discussion and what I feel inside is that synchronicity is kind of like always happening. It's like, because it's just that we can't listen to it. It's like the intuition thing. It's like we can't hear, we can't see. We just, because we're so embedded and so moving and, it has to be a certain way and outcomes and all the rest, and comparing, we're so human in our mind all the time that really we can't connect to the movement beyond that allows synchronicity to be seen. I just wonder, and I could be wrong, it's a feeling that the synchronicity, if you like, even the word is not right, it's just the happening of life. So even the word gets in the way. It's the happening of life. And if we are aligned, again, intuitively, or whatever that word, you can take that word away as well. But if you're aligned to the life and the movement of life, then surely the synchronicity is what life is and what life is here. So, and it just is what's happening for you, and you just move in that. So it's like, appears to be advantageous, or, oh, wow, but only because we're disconnected in a way that we're not open enough. And I just wonder, it was just, I listened to your discussion and that occurred to me. So
yeah, I'd like to say thanks for that. I appreciate what you said, Maria. I think it was very, very, very good. I'd like to add a little quick story. And when I was 8 years of age, I was on a train going to Williams Bay, and we just only went 2 or 3 stops. A woman arrived. She sat opposite. My mother was next to me. The woman was dressed in black with a black veil. And this is July, and I started singing out loud a Christmas carol. And the woman said to my mother, that was my son's favourite Christmas carol. She's on her way to her son's funeral. But that song opened up the connection to that woman, that opened the connection to my mother, who gave her a reading. And as a child, I didn't decide to sing that song. I mean, this fits in, we've mentioned Albert Einstein. He's saying there was no free will. Everything, the script was already written, but I certainly did not decide It's not a child saying, I think this is a good idea. It's July, we're going for a summer holiday, let's sing a Christmas carol. You know?
I mean, I have this feeling, and I ponder on this, and I have no answer, and I won't get any answer. That in what we've just spoken about, when I spoke about the composers, and the quotes you said about if you're not dead, if you're dead, it doesn't mean you're smart. That implies that a certain amount of the ego survives death. And two things. And of course, so if you're dead, but you still have an ego, how does one make progress? One question. The other question is that maybe we attribute, I don't know, maybe it's just, as Eckhart says sometimes, it's like having a radio and the radio waves. When the radio goes kaput, the radio waves are still there. And I wonder sometimes whether the thoughts and the abilities, when we die, just go into some vast melting pot and are not attached to ego in that same way. And for some reason, one tunes into them. And I wonder whether it's that rather than a specific message coming from a specific dead entity to a specific person.
It's a field where you find where people are exploring this what we call the psychic or the intuitive, that they can be at it for years and years and years. I think sometimes we take on questions that, like free will as an example. We forget that the philosophers have been arguing about this for about 3 centuries, you know. And the same with the psychic. I think if you study a little bit of history of Tibet, you have the clash. The Buddhists arrive in Tibet, and Tibet already has a Dalai Lama before the Buddhists arrive. And they have a culture which is a shamanic culture. And these two cultures clash. There's a lot of violence for 200 or 300 years. And they have to find some way. How does this Buddhism, how can the awakened mind fit in with the trance medium? How do these two, how do they come together? And then most of the time the story has been viewed from the people of India, the intellectuals of India. You don't hear as much from the Mongolian side of like the Native Americans, you know, we know about the discovery of America, but we don't teach our children about the invasion of America, you know. So it's seen it from a particular angle. And somehow over 3 centuries, they did manage to bring these two together. And the present Dalai Lama does recognize this shamanic version of Buddhism, if you like. And it opens up. We can easily get into theoretical questions. This is why it's so important to get direct experience on anything. That's more valuable. Don't get lost in the theory. But the challenge is that Buddhism that's coming from the shamanic culture, they're looking for the spiritual teacher to have that psychic ability, to have healing. Jesus would be their equivalent of a fully awakened being. Krishnamurti or Eckhart Tolle wouldn't be, because they're not from their viewpoint, you know that. So you can see these things open up theoretical questions, which we can get lost in the theoretical. More important is to bring about a shift in our daily life and discover what is it that's bringing about the shift in our daily life, what evokes this shift, whatever that may be, you know. Better than just, I think for a large part of spirituality, it can be quite shallow. People worshipping gurus, looking up and not coming upon their own inner discovery, their own direct experience. So yes. I think there is an answer to your questions, but
I think the answer is difficult because none of us have died, and so we don't know the answer. Well, maybe we have died and came back, but we certainly don't know the answer. But I'm interested in what you said. So going back to what you said, because I find it very interesting what you've just said, Bernard, about the kind of like Gosh, do you know, I've completely forgotten now. You were talking about
Refloatingness of the information.
yes. This kind of this free floating information, and when you think about it, or when I think about it, I think that in life, as we're going through life, and we are all different. And we, depending on our psychology and where we are, our awareness, our state of beingness in this world as a human being and as a spiritual seeker or whatever, wherever we are, we attract that type of energy. We are all energy. So we attract people that bring us this necessity to relationship so that we can learn from that. So this energy, we attract the same. If I need something to learn something, then I find someone who will feed that, connect to it, and hopefully will learn. Most people don't. We just go round in circles. So I wonder with that, if we attract things in life, depending on who we are and what we need to understand for our growing awareness of self, then when we die, then this energy, which is what we are, this energetic state of who we were kind of goes, it is there, it kind of resonates there. And so the people who are left are still attracted to that conversation, persist in that energetic kind of like configuration. And so they go to a medium who in turn connects, there's some connection. So they're on that same level in order for that to be kind of like rebirthed and brought through and the answers given. And I wonder, because it comes to the point, I think, where I don't know how you feel. I wouldn't necessarily go to a psychic, although I'm interested in intuition and this alignment to source. In that way, but I wonder, like, because I've been to mediumship, kind of churches and whatever in my past, many years ago, and people who come seem to be attracted to the same type of medium, the same level of awareness, the same state of asleepness, the same state of consciousness. So that there seems to be a connection there too. So I just wonder maybe if there is a connection to that, and that it kind of stops, and that's the level that we kind of like can penetrate, as having had a relationship with that person prior to their death. I don't know what you think.
When I went to see Eckhart up at Findhorn, the first 20 minutes he read from the book called A Course in Miracles, which is a channeled work. And the first 2 or 3 years that he spoke, he always took a copy of this book with him. And but it is a big topic. It's too big a topic for us to do. But I have seen people who benefit. They've maybe lost a child, and they come to my mother or a medium, and you can see the difference it makes to them, the healing.
Yeah,
I think absolutely. There can be an authentic side to it. We know the trivial side is all over the place.
Yeah, I think as well, though, there are definitely mediums who can help in that, or psychics or whatever, but we have to be careful as well.
Do you have your poem, Bernard? Well, let's time. I've got one here as well. Let's go for the poetry.
It's not quite a poem. It's more what's the word? A sloka, I suppose, and it comes from the third Chinese patriarch of Zen. And it's very long, but I'm only going to read the first little bit. And I think it is wonderful. It is very poetic. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. When the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail.
We'll just add another, this is our last poem for today. It's from an American woman, poet called Mary Oliver. She usually writes poems about nature. 99% of her poems are descriptions of nature. This is about the last day of the Buddha. And the word light here refers to the light of aware presence. So, make of yourself a light, said the Buddha before he died. I think of this in the morning as the east begins to tear off its many clouds of darkness to send up the first signal, a white fan streaked with pink, violet and evergreen. An old man, he lay down between two salad trees, and he might have said anything, knowing it was his final hour. The sunlight burning upwards thickens over the fields as around him the villagers gathered and stretched forward to listen. No doubt he thought of everything that had happened in his difficult life. And then I feel the sun itself as it blazes over the hills like a million flowers on fire. Clearly as a witness, I am not needed here. And yet I feel myself turning towards something of inexplicable value. Slowly beneath the branches of the salad tree, he raised his head. He looked into the faces of the frightened crowd. Make of yourself a light. I'd just like to thank everybody who took part today. This is our final podcast recorded from Glasgow. As we're approaching Christmas time, 2025, I thought I would finish with a little Christmas story that sums up our dialogue today. A group of mediums in Chicago, they meet once a month to channel different entities, and the local psychiatrist challenges them. How can you be sure that you're in touch with real entities? Are you not just in touch with your own unconscious mind? And so they decide to prove that it's not just a figment of their imagination. They will try and contact Santa Claus. And to the great surprise, the Santa Claus shows up. Not only does he know the names of all the reindeer, but he knows exactly what everyone wants for Christmas, and he wants to confirm to everybody this is not a figment of your imagination. So it's official from Santa Claus. I'd like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and most of all, peace be with you.